Hello everybody and welcome back to Rekindling the Flame, episode number 15. I'm Fox with Foxeo Plays, and for those of you who have been watching this in a timely manner, you probably thought that I would never get back to this playthrough and actually finish it. But, as I mentioned on Twitter, I'm actually up to, I believe, episode 19, and the holdup on all of this was quite simply this episode. You see, in episode 15, I was going through a part of the Smoldering Lake, I believe that's what it's called, and I was not happy with the situation there, the placement of enemies and the number of enemies and the way those enemies were designed. In fact, I was pretty darn unhappy with it. And so I think ultimately what happened was that I found myself being overly negative to the degree that even I felt that it was not something I wanted to release to the general public. So, after watching part of that episode, as I was editing it, I decided that I would go back over and do post-commentary. So that's what this is. This is post-commentary. Today's drink of choice is coffee, and as always, it's hot, and it's black. And it's delicious. You know, I should start making cold coffee. What do they call it? Cold brew. Cold brew coffee. It's not actually that difficult. However, I'm just so used to coffee being hot. But I think I could get used to cold coffee, even plain in black. And that would be pretty nice, given that it is now summer. It is officially summer as of, what, June 20th, I do believe. And with all of that, I'm also noticing that my computer room here gets quite warm, especially when running two computers, playing a video game on one, where my graphics card is a mini heater, and then rendering a video on the other one. And even when I turn off the monitors on the other video, or the other computer that's simply rendering, it's still producing a lot of heat. So ultimately, I'm trying to find other solutions. Right now, I've got a fan blowing over some ice, and I'm not sure that's really doing a whole lot. I've been trying to look at maybe insulating my house better, but ultimately I don't think my AC unit can quite keep up with everything that's going on in the house, outside, especially if it gets humid out. But, having said that, it's not that my AC unit can't keep it nice and cool. It can, it's just that I need it really cold. Like, I would prefer 65 degrees in the house, but that would be quite expensive all year long, so I settle for 68. And that is still quite low for indoors at all times. What we're doing now is progressing forward in the Smoldering Lake, leveling up, and moving ever closer to our goal of being a true... no, not Temple Knight. What am I thinking? That's the other playthrough of being a pyromancer. I started to feel like I'd made a mistake in becoming a pyromancer. I talked about this before, but ultimately, as I play through it, I realized that for me, well, I liked pyromancy in Dark Souls because it really didn't function like other magic. It really wasn't magic. It was separate from it. Although it did use a numbered casting system, it did not depend on a stat. So essentially pyromancy in a way was really overpowered in Dark Souls because with nothing more than a little bit of investment in attunement to get some extra slots, all you had to do was power up your pyromancy flame, which is not a glove, by the way. I know there was one popular uploader who did comment that he knows it's not a glove, but that's just how people refer to it, as the pyro glove. It is not a glove, it is quite simply a flame. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Once you power that up by dropping some souls into it and basically upgrade it, you could be super powerful on the pyromancy side with little investment in actual character levels. Now this, in Dark Souls 2, they changed that, as well as Dark Souls 3. Unfortunately, that causes me to like pyromancy less than I'd hoped, but we'll press onward trying to get this playthrough done. Although you may notice me spending a lot less effort in trying to go the pyro route. That's just typically what happens. Like, even when I did my sorceress playthrough of Dark Souls from quite a while ago, it was a long time ago, I tended to focus on the melee side of things. I basically went with an intelligence build and then built my melee character around intelligence and occasionally actually used sorceries. Somebody criticized me in the comment section that I was mainly just focusing on using my enchanted longsword. And that really is true. That's what I was doing. So I got great Chaos Fire Orb, seeing what that does. Great combustion. We're using a nice little wooden shield here because it gives us some great stability, even though it's not 100% physical block. But with all of that, hopefully I think I'm ready to get going back to the Smoldering Lake and actually knock this out. kind of a waste of nearly 5 minutes of this kind of stuff, but you know, in some playthroughs, I want to shave off time by not including all this sort of housekeeping stuff of going back and leveling up and whatnot. Excuse me, yawning. But a lot of people will be like, hey, you know, we didn't see you level up, or we didn't see this, because apparently some people like to actually follow my playthrough and make a duplicate build, like replicate my build to the T. Especially, for example, my Dark Souls beginners walkthrough, but that makes sense for that. It's been so long since I've played it, and this is an episode many playthroughs ago for me. Like I said, I'm up to episode 19 now. I've already recorded episode 19, that I have little idea what I'm doing in here other than going to the Smoldering Lake. So given that it's post-commentary, I think we'll talk about some other things surrounding the Souls series, Dark Souls 3 in general, the character build, and where I felt I went wrong. In terms of going with that fire longsword, I don't think it's quite as powerful as I'd hoped it would be. Excuse me. Oh, apparently I really need this coffee because I'm yawning way too much. But in the Smoldering Lake here, I think I did complain about some of these enemies in the last episode. I'm not a fan of enemies in any game that just kind of jump all over the place, or particularly bosses, large bosses that just flail wildly. And I think flail is the best word for it. Flail is also a type of weapon, I believe, right? A flail? Isn't that the type of weapon where you basically have a hard wooden stick handle attached and a chain is attached to the handle, and at the end of the chain is basically a spiked ball that looks like the end of a mace. And the idea of the flail is that you could spin it all over the place, and actually the mace kind of spiked ball on the end, that would basically flail around wildly. And the flailing didn't really start so much in Dark Souls 2, although it was there to a certain degree. But the dependence on enemies and bosses that flail wildly really started with Bloodborne. It makes a bit of sense there, because Bloodborne is supposed to be faster paced. And it's supposed to get you to, you know, move fast, attack, be aggressive. But I don't think it's necessarily the best. I was checking that for a illusory wall. I should have known there wasn't one. It's not my first time through the game. But I think the problem becomes that this is not Diablo. You know, this is not any old hack and slash game. This is Dark Souls 3. Or that was Bloodborne that we were talking about just a moment ago. The Souls formula, which Bloodborne is obviously built upon, I don't think is very well suited for really fast-paced combat. And what I mean by that is not that you can't have enemies that attack somewhat fast, but to have enemies that flail wildly, jump all over the place, attack really quickly, I think pretty much pushes the basic Souls formula to the limit of what it can do. And you start to see kind of the cracks in it. It's not built for that very clearly, because when you look at Demon Souls and Dark Souls, they were much slower, more methodical games. Whereas Dark Souls 2 was a bit faster, and Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne are quite a lot faster. In fact, I think Dark Souls 3 is essentially a little bit of Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, and a little bit of Bloodborne mixed in. I would have loved it had Dark Souls 2's influence on the game been less so, that there'd be less influence. In fact, I would have preferred that there'd been no influence. I would have really liked... Yeah, you'll notice as I turn around these corners, the texture popping is very, very significant. I love the way the Black Knight just flips that dude up in the air. Although I think I died to him one time when he just came around the corner and nailed me. Alright, so here we go. I don't know what I just cast there. Was that Flash Sweat? Not sure what that's about. Probably cast that by mistake, I would imagine. I don't think there's any reason to cast Flash Sweat when fighting up against the Black Knight. Also, I was half curious if the Black Knights still have their incredible fire resistance that they had in Dark Souls, and I guess they do, because although it doesn't seem as much, but I'm certainly not doing a ton of damage, and as a completely fire-based build... Oh, excuse me, I just can't stop yawning. See, I'm not focused on anything, like playing the game, because this is post-commentary, so I'm just sort of chilling here and stretching. It's causing me to yawn. But anyway, I think that as a completely fire-based build, I'm putting myself at a disadvantage. When you look at a lot of the enemies in the game, there are some fire-based enemies, and although they're not immune to fire, thank goodness, some of them are quite resistant to it. And when my melee is fire-based, and my spells are fire-based, I don't really have a lot of options, do I? I think this room right here is actually the result of an illusory wall, so I think I may have forgotten that. Although, it is not beyond FromSoft to put multiple illusory walls one after another. After all, this is a minor spoiler for Dark Souls, so you'll want to mute this. It's not a story spoiler, just an area kind of spoiler for secret. But you can mute it for about 20 seconds and you won't hear this. But in the Blighttown Swamp, if you went up the tree, you could actually go through an illusory wall that led to a chest, and if you hit the wall behind the chest, it was another illusory wall that led to a whole brand new area. Which I think is really awesome. Now, people have commented how they thought that that was something really rare and really incredible for the developers to spend so much time and effort creating an area in a game and yet to hide it so well that many people would never discover it. And ultimately, a lot of their effort would go unnoticed and unappreciated by people who never found it. But I don't really think that's the case, because this is not, 1995 or something. Back when I was a kid, when we got video games, like, say, perfect example, everyone knows this from the angry video game nerd, James Rolfe, Castlevania II Simon's Quest. Unless you bought some sort of guidebook or you found secrets to it in Nintendo Power or some magazine like that, the only other option you had to basically have, to get information on secrets and whatnot was if you had a friend who knew somehow. Other than that, of course, you had to just try to figure everything out on your own. And some things were so cryptic in games back then, and even are today to some extent, that it was nearly impossible. So if you didn't have a friend who knew, and you didn't have any source that knew, like a magazine or a guidebook or something, that was pretty much it. Now, there were some, like, 1-900 numbers you could call, but I think most kids' parents would lay into them if they tried to call a 1-900 number to ask questions about a video game. Only once did I manage to convince my parents to let me call a 1-900 number. And believe it or not, I actually remember what it was. I called about the video game 7th Saga on the Super Nintendo. Who remembers that? Who remembers 7th Saga? By the way, I heard there was a sequel, but I've never played it. 7th Saga was an interesting role-playing game on the Super Nintendo that, if I remember correctly, you could only have one additional party member. You could choose who you played the game through as, and there were some interesting characters. Like, there was even like this kind of almost Capra demon-like character that you could play as. And then as you get further in the game, you could ultimately choose one of the other characters to become part of your party. It's just two characters, really, a duo. And, well, I was finding the game very difficult, so I used the Super Nintendo Game Genie to cheat a little to get ahead in the game. And then I stopped using it because, I didn't want to cheat my whole way through the game. But then I got stuck at this one point where I couldn't get past this one boss. And finally, I convinced my parents to let me call the 1-900 number. I hate this guy right here. He is extremely tough. But, oh, wow. Wow, yeah. Did he parry me or what? Oh, no, I think he took out my guard. What a punk, right? I don't think I was happy when that happened, but it did. Anyway, I couldn't defeat the boss, so I called the 1-900 number, and I was telling the guy, I just cannot figure out how to beat this guy. And he asked me, well, who else do you have in your party? And I said, well, I'm just by myself. It's just me. I didn't pick up another character. And he's like, what? He's like, how did you get this far if you didn't have another character? You shouldn't have been able to get this far. And finally, I kind of avoided it for a little while, and he kept pressing me on it. And I was finally like, okay, I use the Game Genie. So he told me to go pick up a party member, and I did. And then, of course, it was reasonable after that. But, this isn't Simon's Quest anymore. This isn't the old days. Anything past what, like about 2002, 2003? I don't remember exactly when it became common, but there was a point at which it was extremely easy to find information on all of the even remotely popular games out there. So, say for example, you started playing, I don't know, Crystalis on the Nintendo. You could find information on the internet about it, walkthroughs and guides and whatnot. If you wanted to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the Nintendo, if you wanted to play, I don't know, Spike McFang on the Super Nintendo. I don't know why these games are coming up, but you could find just about any information you needed on the internet somewhere. You might have to look for a little bit because the internet wasn't well organized back then, and in fact they hadn't even perfected the search. A lot of what you did back then was on Yahoo, and Yahoo, believe it or not, they would have people who would hand pick categories and websites to go in those categories. They would set up a category, for example, video games, and then they'd set up a subcategory of video games, Super Nintendo, and then they would actually just find sites out there somehow. I don't know exactly how they found them. They would hand pick them and then put the links in there underneath their categories. And so for a while, oh, I hate these guys. You know, one thing that frustrates me is they continue to run even after hitting them. So I wish, like, if you hit them, they should at least pause or flip over or something. But anyway, they're not as bad as they were in Dark Souls 2, where all you did was ever swat above them, and that drove me nuts, that's for sure. So anyway, I forgot exactly what I was talking about, but eventually, you know, the internet became so mature in the sense of, you know, it grew to be more advanced and easier to find content and have a lot more content, that we're at the point now where, honestly, is anyone out there playing Dark Souls for any length of time who cares about the game and just hasn't discovered any of the secret areas that may or may not be in it? Let's be honest, I mean, most people are looking that stuff up, and even if you're not actively looking for it, you've probably seen it on YouTube, you've seen it on Twitch, you've heard about it from someone else. There's just way too much information out there where no matter how well you hide something in a game, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be found relatively quickly, and then it's going to be disseminated all over the internet. So the internet is sort of like the great rumor mill. Once something gets out there, it's out there all over the place. Wow, look at that. I love that charge attack he does. Oh, see, I should have moved in for the special critical hit. Horus is actually a tough guy to beat here. I mean, he's not terribly difficult, but, you know, he's not a pushover, that's for sure. He was sort of fun to fight, too, although in their effort to prevent players from just doing the pivot backstab, or circle strafe, not circle strafe, circle backstab, they do make some enemies basically follow you way too closely. They track you one-to-one. And some enemies in this game also have that really bad Dark Souls 2 habit of tracking you to the absolute last split second. I would say they track you to the absolute last half second of your movement. And so if your roll occurs anytime before approximately a half second before the attack, it will hit you. And that's just a very frustrating thing that they did. It does make it more difficult, I'll give them that. But in my personal opinion, and in the opinion of many others, obviously, if you just browse the internet shortly for a brief period of time and look for opinions of Dark Souls 2, in my opinion, it makes the game very frustrating and feels unfair. Of course, the concept of fair is very nebulous, it's ambiguous, and it's subjective. I don't really mind this area so much, although I absolutely can't stand those bird enemies down below. In fact, the bird enemies frustrated me so greatly, the fire orb shooting bird enemies, that they alone are pretty much the reason this entire episode is post-commentary. I got so frustrated with them that I felt like the commentary was too negative. And for those of you that have been with me for a while, watching my content on my main channel, FoxeoGames, and here at Foxeo Plays, if Fox is saying his content is too negative, you know it's negative. Because I have never shied away from being negative about games. A lot of people accuse me of being a pessimist, just always skeptical and pessimistic and cynical. And one person said, and I understand why they said it, I don't blame them for it, but they said that I was viewing the world through a damp blanket or a wet blanket, something like that. And, you know, I totally got that. I thought that was a good, not an analogy, but a metaphor. I think that's a metaphor, right? I'm getting my terms wrong, but I think that was a good metaphor. I think that kind of really explained well what he was trying to describe. And in some ways that's a little bit true, but when I do enjoy something, I tend to just enjoy it and not necessarily express that a whole lot unless I'm really enjoying it. Like, I guess it takes a lot to impress me. Some people are impressed by a little, some people are impressed by a decent amount, and some people it takes a lot to impress them. And I think I'm the type that it takes a lot to impress me. So I oftentimes, like when I was a teacher, I had to remember, okay, you know, you need to give students praise. You need to give students positive feedback, even if what they did is not exceptional. Sometimes being good enough deserves some praise. There's a lot of debate on that, but you know, I had to constantly remind myself that not everything has to be exceptional in order for me to say it's good. And that's kind of one of those things I have to remind myself with video games. As of the recording of this video, which is probably going to just be one day before it shows up on Foxeo Plays, this channel, I'm really into Odinsphere Life Dressier. I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it. I think it's a German word, but whatever. If you know how to pronounce it, feel free to let me know. And now you'll see why I absolutely hate these guys right here. But fortunately, this is commentary after the fact. So, because my hands are not on the controller and I'm not playing right now, the frustration I feel at seeing me die is a whole lot less than the frustration I felt at dying while the controller's in my hands. In that case, I was really close to the bonfire and didn't lose a whole lot, but I just can't see why they would make an enemy like that. I mean, I can understand if you want to make one enemy like this, just one at a time, because they're extremely difficult. They have a bunch of fire moves that hit hard. They have attacks that can hit fairly hard, melee attacks. They have this orb that they can put out, at least one orb that auto shoots fire at you, and sometimes the orb will go up in the air so you can't actually get to it unless you have a ranged attack. As soon as you destroy the orb, it seems like they want to put another orb up to replace it. They can hit you multiple times in a row throwing fire. And on top of all that, not that that doesn't make them difficult enough, but then they have to put these guys in rooms with others of them. Like they're 2, 3. I think at one point there's what, 4 of them that can all potentially see and attack you at the same time. So let's just say there's 3, right? So there's 3 of these guys. Each one puts up 1 fire orb. That is 6 things that can shoot at you, 3 things that can hit you with melee. And 3 of those things that are shooting at you are potentially out of melee range, requiring that you have some sort of ranged attack to reach them. And if you manage to kill any one of those 3 things that shoot at you, the orbs, they can be replaced immediately and quickly. So I have a lot of issues with that. And then I got frustrated by Mr. Poison Fog there, who was constantly blowing that fog and making it impossible to see anything, which I know is the point, but still, I wasn't a big fan of that, and got myself killed again. I wonder if you can get their spear. That spear looks interesting in a sort of crude way. Also, I experienced a lot of deaths in this episode, so you can see why I might be a bit frustrated by that. And to a certain degree, I wasn't really feeling like playing the game. I was feeling like doing something else, playing another game, but I was sort of pushing my way through to get the episodes out. And that's one of the things that you face when you're uploading playthroughs, or if you're uploading review videos. If your heart's not in it, it usually shows in the video. The content that you create doesn't have that spark to it. It screams forced, and that's never a good thing. Now, as you can see, they really stack up the enemies there. And if you run down here to try to escape them, there are a whole bunch of those bird critters there that are shooting at you with orbs shooting at you. I'm not alone in saying that this area is positively ridiculous. It's not impossible. There are ways to handle it, but one thing I've never liked is the notion that you should have to approach really, really slowly and shoot with a bow from a distance and try to pull one enemy around the corner at a time. And that is useful. That'll work in a lot of games. It's pulling enemies. Peek around the corner, shoot an enemy with an arrow, and then go back around the corner and hope it comes out so it's not near the rest. But I don't like that, because I feel like this game is best when there's melee, not ranged. And the last thing I want to do is suddenly change my playstyle and start acting like it's Metal Gear Solid, where I have to sneak around and attack enemies silently. It's not really built for that either, obviously. I swear I was trying to dodge that guy, but I just wasn't succeeding, huh? And hit by the orb. That was the other frustrating thing too. Oh, he can put up 2 orbs. Okay, so that's what I was wondering about that. I was thinking that was the case. So it appears that he's got 2 orbs up. I thought that was the case, but I didn't want to jump on them too much if that wasn't true. But assuming that there's 3 at one point that are visible all at the same time, that can attack you all at the same time, and they put up 2 each, that's 3 times 2 is 6, plus the original 3. So that is 9 things that could be potentially shooting fire at you. 3 of which can also attack you with melee. So again, we've experienced another death. Very exciting. I love it. I don't mind sharing criticisms of the game. I know a lot of people don't like that. Some people don't like it. I love it. It's like every corner I went around, there's always something shooting at me. And some people can say, oh, well, it keeps you on your feet. I guess it does. But at the same time, I just found it a bit frustrating, to put it mildly. Alright. So here we go. We got 1, 2, 3 orbs and 2 of those guys at the moment. I think there's another guy back there behind one of those pillars, is there not? I thought this was where you had 3 of them at the same time. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe you can backstab them either. Now, there is something quite valuable behind these guys if you manage to get through them, but in all honesty, it's probably easier and safer, and you'll have more success just running it, just make it a run for it, to grab the item than to actually fight through them. And here, I was trying the spam technique, but I was just constantly running out of stamina, so as soon as I get a little stamina back, I'd attack again, and then wait for the stamina, and then attack again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh wow, 4 fire orbs in that guy. So if the other guy had been alive, that's at least 6 things that could shoot at me. Now, I think what I was doing here was waiting to see if one of those orbs would go away. Now, at some point, I don't remember if it's on this playthrough, it was on my first playthrough, I did take out a bow and shoot some of the orbs. But like I said before, it gets a bit discouraging when you shoot the orb, destroy it, and then they just put up another one. So that sort of kills the initiative for that. Now, I've actually been kind of keeping up with Newegg.com, Amazon.com, and a couple other websites to see what's going on with the GTX 1080. That is the next generation of NVIDIA's graphics card. Well, as of the release of this video, it's the current generation. It's the newest one. I believe it's Pascal, right? That they're calling it Pascal? I believe because last generation was Maxwell. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I don't want to be wrong. But it's a new architecture. It's supposedly ultra fast, really good, but if you have, like me, if you have a GTX 980 Ti, 6 gigs of RAM, then the GTX 1080 with 8 gigs at 1080p with all current new games is really going to be overkill. The 1080. The 1080 is not going to make a big difference, especially with so many games being locked to 60 FPS. So that's, once you hit that, it's kind of, that's it. once you're at a consistent 60 at nearly all times, there's really not a whole lot else, additional graphics power is going to do for you. 60 is 60 is 60. Now, the GTX 1080 is supposed to retail for, I believe, $600, although it's about $650 if you get one of the, what do they call those? The other brand names like Gigabyte, MSI, EVGA, and whatnot. I tend to do the Gigabyte cards, the old WindForce line, which now they call the G1 Gaming line, I believe. I believe they renamed it. I love that because it has the 3-fan setup on it, 3 fans across the board, and as long as they're still doing what they were doing with the other cards, the GTX 770, 970, and 980 Ti, they had the cards spin the opposite direction really quickly when you first boot up the computer, and then start spinning back normally. And what that does is it really helps to kick off a lot of the dust. So when I pulled the GTX 770 out of my machine to replace it with the 970, and when I pulled the 970 out to replace it with the 980 Ti, I noticed that there was virtually no dust buildup whatsoever on the fans. There was a little tiny layer of dust on the bottom of the board itself, and some along the sides. That would make sense. But as for the fans, they were virtually dust free. I mean, at a glance, if you didn't analyze it too closely, you might not even notice that it had been used. So that was interesting. Months of use and virtually no dust buildup. Here, I do believe I stopped to express a little bit of frustration, which is totally understandable at how many times I've died here. Ironically enough, I didn't die nearly this many times my first time through, but it is what it is. So, I'm not sure if I'll be buying the GTX 1080 anytime soon. I am keeping an eye on it, see where we're at. It's out of stock virtually everywhere. The only places I've found that you can buy it, other than like eBay and whatnot, like Amazon's Market, where individuals sell. Here's the treasure I was talking about. Yeah, Ande Bone Shard, definitely something you want. Hidden elsewhere around here, somewhere else in this level, I'm pretty sure, is an Estus Flask Shard as well. So if you want to max out your Estus Flask, you do need to visit this fairly hidden area of the game. This is one of the game's somewhat hidden areas. I also got turned around a bit in this area. Couldn't figure out where I was supposed to go. I do that sometimes. I get turned around. And then it's so obvious when I find it, I feel like an idiot for not realizing it. Like, I would pass by the same spot over and over and over again and not see maybe a little tiny hallway or a door that I hadn't been down, or I'd see a set of stairs 100 times and not realize that that's the set of stairs I need to go down or up or whatever, and I maybe thought the stairs led somewhere else. But now that I've gotten one of the hardest things to reach down there, the Ande Bone Shard, which I could have just made a run for, like I said, I should have less trouble at that point. But again, these guys right here are a bit of a hassle. Much harder to backstab them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do miss it. Oh, how I miss the days when you could just circle backstab everything. I mean, once you learned how to circle backstab in Dark Souls, the game became so much easier. And if you learned how to circle backstab and parry most of the enemies, Dark Souls is mostly a breeze. You could breeze through most of the game, rarely ever dying. Which is very interesting, because when I first played the game, someone told me, you know, to focus on backstabs, and I was telling them, well, you know, not everything can be backstabbed, so that's a very limited mechanic. Well, it is limited, but not nearly as limited as I first thought it was. Most enemies can be backstabbed in Dark Souls. Interestingly enough, if I remember correctly, I don't think there was a single boss in Dark Souls that could be backstabbed, although there are a couple boss encounters in Dark Souls 3 where you can backstab them, but those encounters, to my knowledge, all involve multiple enemies, like the Deacons of the Deep, and then the what's that other one called? The Watchmen or the Watchers, the guards, the dude that has the really pointy triangular hat. You know, where you go in and they're fighting each other as well as fighting you. I can't think of the name of that boss. Someone will post it in the comments section. I'm doing this playthrough as well as the Temple Knight playthrough, and I don't anticipate doing too many more playthroughs. I do want to do a dexterity build, although I don't know when exactly that'll be. Wow, I got lucky. I barely dodged that little move there. Yeah, that guy's really frustrating there, that grab attack. He'll be staggered by most attacks, and then suddenly when he does his jump, he'll be immune to stagger. Not cool. We're gonna interrupt this guy here who's just chill. Oh yeah, see, he got me. And not dead. It's like a miracle. Do I die? Or do I survive? Oh, does he get powered up from that? Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Oh, why did I keep swinging? I need to jump away from that. Yep. I tried to swing and got attacked. You know, the other thing about those kind of attacks is... Oh, still alive. Is I'm really not a fan of those long grab attacks in terms of like the length of the animation. I would prefer that the grab attacks be relatively short because personally I just find it frustrating to sit through a long grab attack animation. Like control is taken away and I just gotta sit there and wait for my character to get his health drained and whatnot. Yeah, look at that. That little Slimer dude there is immune to that fire damage. So I tested it again. Yep, sure enough, appears 100% immune to fire. Which is not a big deal because, I mean, you could pretty much avoid all of these little slimes. You can just run around them. You don't even have to bother with them. And I'm not sure if I later switch out my weapon. It's been so long since I played this. It's been over a month, I believe. I haven't played the Temple Knight build in a while either. I'm still going through my Salt and Sanctuary playthrough as of the upload of this video. And I do plan to finish that, I hope. Although, a little spoiler, guys. Oh, you've already seen this part. Sorry, it's not a spoiler, but I ended up restarting. And instead of restarting the entire playthrough, erasing it, and going back and starting in episode 1, I just continued numbering the episodes in sequential order. So I think it was episode 5. It was either episode 4 or 5. I actually restart, build a new character, and begin again. And the idea behind that is I wanted to go with a pure melee class because I'd gotten what I felt was a good distance into the game and still had just no value in the castings that the Paladin had. And deciding that there was no value in any of the magic, I wasn't really doing anything with it. And I felt like I just wasted points putting it into, I think it was what, willpower? Wisdom? No, wisdom. Can't remember what it is. But I wanted to restart over. I wanted to start over and focus on melee only because that's really my forte. That is my cup of tea. That's what works for me in most RPGs. I just do really well with melee builds. They more naturally suit my playstyle. And I also like the fact that generally when you're making a melee build in most RPGs, your character tends to be a lot less squishy. It means they can resist damage a lot better, either wearing heavier armor, having more health, or a combination of both. And I know that's kind of that's a definite carryover from the old days of Dungeons and Dragons. For those of you that don't know much about Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe you haven't played any games that use the old, advanced Dungeons and Dragons statistics and stats and all that stuff, well, yeah, they were fairly complicated. They were overly complicated. They had way too much stuff going for it. I hated the fact that there were like different skill sets for swords versus short swords versus mace versus hammer versus long sword. It's just ridiculous how many different things there were. It got overwhelming, but it's interesting to note just how much of current RPG tradition, or how much... Oh, yeah, see, I tried to jump that again, completely failed. I'm pretty sure you can jump that, but I just failed it. It's interesting to note how much of what's currently in modern RPGs comes from the old Dungeons and Dragons. Quite a lot, actually. So, adapting an old board game to the video game format essentially created what we know now as the modern video game RPG. I am so close to dead that it's not even funny. I really should run back to the bonfire, but I don't know if that's what I'm going to do or not. That would be a very smart move right now, but we'll see if I'm smart or if I'm unnecessarily brave, shall I say. Oh yes, I took the smart route. And I do actually believe that I'm going to call it right there at the bonfire, because I can see from the timeline as I'm recording this post-commentary that I'm approaching the end of the video. I think also here I stood still for a bit and explained briefly why I was so negative and gave a brief apology for it, but this time around I'm not as negative, so I guess it's okay. I'll do post commentary in the future if I feel like the commentary is not sufficient, but I believe all the other episodes I've recorded so far have been good enough for me. I'm happy with them as they are. So you should see a lot more episodes of Rekindling the Flame come out. I may change up the character a bit, forgive me if I do, from the original intent. But with that, I'm Fox with Foxeo Plays. If you like the video, make sure to like it. If you don't like it, you can dislike it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check the video description for all that other stuff down there, like Twitch, Twitter, whatnot. And I will see you guys next time. Later, everybody. Okay, yeah, go ahead and bow now. Come on, Fox, do the bow. I said goodbye to everybody, and now there's this awkward pause. Just click the bow. Oh, come on now. Really? He's gonna bow eventually. Or wave. Soon. There we go. Okay, now I know it's coming to an end. Got that little Twitter message at the bottom. Alright, see you later, guys.